And the front lines.
Okay. If anybody has a question during the process, feel free to raise your hand. If I hear background noise, I will mute you if you aren't already. Thank you for muting yourselves. So you can raise a hand or unmute and chime in. This meeting is being recorded. So welcome and greetings to a spring equinox celebration. Our topic today is spiritual growth and transformation with me, Daniel Endy, and our special guest, Mark Brooks. Mark, want to say hello?
Hi, hello everybody. Glad to be here. I hope you all enjoy the show today.
Yes. So I'm Daniel, and my website is Soulful Growth. My motto is Awaken, Empower, and Transform. And you can find me at soulfulgrowth.com, and the full has 2 L's. And Mark is the author of a book called Christianity from a Spiritual Perspective. And we'll be getting into that in different ways, but have no fear. We're not going to inundate you with religion here. And Mark and I are both part of something called Consciousness Cafe. If you want to check that out, you can see it at consciousness-cafe.com. And so happy spring equinox. This is my favorite time of year when life comes back to the world, at least up here in the northern hemisphere. When the sun starts returning, the days get longer, the color of the sun is warmer, and the plants and trees begin to sprout. It's just my favorite. To start us off today, we'll talk a little more about that later. To start us off, I want to have this quote by Albert Einstein, pretty famous at this point, although some people may not have heard it. Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. Einstein wasn't particularly religious, as I would define religious. He is instead more of a secular person. But he wouldn't normally talk about such things. And I think what he really would have said is science without spirituality is lame, and spirituality without science is blind. And I certainly feel that way. And Mark does too. Mark's book is very similar to some concepts I've had for books, which I've started and been unable to complete. But Mark does do his best to bridge science and spirituality. And we'll be talking about a particular aspect of that today. So, what is spirituality? Mark, do you care to talk about your diagram here?
Sure. This is from a parable of the 6 blind men and the elephant. And it's popular in the Eastern Hemisphere, but it talks about 6 blind academics who came upon an elephant, and they each felt a different part of the elephant and declared that it's a fan, no, it's a rope, it's a tree, it's a wall, it's a hose, it's a sword. And they argued with each other based on just what little bit of the elephant that they understood. And they didn't understand that it was much bigger than what they all were thinking. And that was my analogy for spirituality, because it's much bigger. It's been around so much longer, thousands of years, all over the globe, many different world religions. And it's much bigger than what anyone can wrap their arms around or even study in a lifetime. So that's, it's important for us to understand and to be able to apply, but it's a big elephant, and we need to realize it's much bigger than us.
Excellent. So this is a wonderful analogy, in my opinion. I really love it with respect to spirituality here. And I never quite put the two together before this, so thank you, Mark. But this is really what it's like for us. I think, we're all experiencing different things. Some of us have near-death experience. Some of us have a modest spiritual experience or a major one, like the class the other night on Kundalini from Consciousness Cafe. And each of us comes at it from a different direction. But when we see the whole, when we can compare our notes and realize that these are not whole concepts that we're dealing with, these are pieces, these are elements of the whole. And as we share and put these things together, we gain the full perspective. So Mark, like myself, is a fan of diagrams, and he's got some amazing diagrams in his book. And this is the one we're going to be focusing on for today. This is what Mark calls his spiritual development framework. And we're going to go through this in detail, so don't worry. So Mark, do you want to say anything about this at the high level here?
Just one thing is, it's important to know where you are on your spiritual journey. And a lot of us go to different workshops or conferences. We listen to podcasts. We listen to or go to websites like the Consciousness Cafe. We do all these different things, but it's important that we have a structure around what we're doing so that we can move forward. And I like to use the analogy I like to call it spiritual evolution. We're on a path of spiritually evolving while we're here on Earth. And I use the analogy of a computer program that Dr. Richard Dawkins did, and he wrote about in The Blind Watchmaker, a book that he wrote about 20 years ago, where he took a computer program that he wanted to use to prove the power of physical evolution. And he took 100 instances of 28 randomly generated characters, and he put them in an algorithm that randomly changed one or two characters in each one of the instances. And he calculated that for this random change of letters to arrive at a 28 character phrase called "Methinks It's Like a Weasel," it was a phrase from the play Hamlet, the probability of that occurring by random chance is 1 in 10 to the 40th, which is really small. But in order to prove evolution, he added an evolutionary function to it, in which he took the instance out of the 100 that came closest to the objective, which was "Methinks It's Like a Weasel," and made it the parent for the next iteration. So you pick one out of this iteration, make it the parent for the next one, pick one out of the next iteration, make it the parent for the third, and so on. And he was able to arrive at that phrase, "Methinks It's Like a Weasel," after about 50 iterations. So he went from 1 in 10 to the 40th to 50. And that was one of the more powerful proofs for physical evolution. But I want to say that spiritual evolution is the same thing. You have unchanging scripture that's been around in the world religions for thousands of years. And as people find that and want to embrace it or use that to help them get along in their spiritual walk, and they do that generation to generation to generation, they're doing a spiritual evolution, just like Dawkins was talking about for a physical evolution. And that's brings us to this chart here. A spiritual development framework is to give you an idea of how to progress, or how you could progress in your spiritual evolution. And this is not the only chart that's around. Monastics, theologians, people all throughout history have done other similar frameworks. So I would encourage you to look at books on mysticism, look at books on monastics, look at books from the Eastern religions, but search for something that resonates with you and that you can realize as where you are on your path. And we're just going to talk about this as one path today, but I hope it gives you an idea of how you can identify where you are on your journey and where other people are on their journey. And then also, too, I wanted to say the journey is what's important in this spiritual process. You know, it's where you go and what you do in your life that helps you grow and mature that's important. It's not the end result. And with that, that'll be it.
Okay. So
I enjoy talking about this.
The key points to take away then, I agree with you that evolution is not completely random. It's something that builds upon prior iterations. And so we see how that works in evolution itself. It's not, okay, here's a random throw of the dice, here's another random throw of the dice. It's, okay, here's a throw of the dice, and oh, look, we've got something interesting. We've got an amoeba, and let's throw some more dice, and oh, look, we've got plants, and then we've got trees, and then we've got animals, and then we've got human beings, to shorten the cycle quite a lot. And the idea then is that we're not only evolving physically, indeed, we are not only physical beings, we are spiritual beings. And let me take this moment to say, what we share here today is not ever meant to be something that you must agree with or believe in. I believe in empowerment, and one of the keys to empowerment is being free to choose and make up your own mind and pick the things that work for you at whatever stage of your own spiritual path that you are on. So if something here today resonates with you, please take that, add it to your toolbox. And if it doesn't, let it go. It means it's not meant for you. So the idea then is that as we evolve, not only physically, but spiritually, we are lifting the tide. We are raising the tide, and that raises the consciousness of all the beings, not only in our world, not only in the physical, but in the spiritual, and not only in our particular area of the spiritual, but all across the entire universe. Mark has some amazing detailed things in his book, which we may touch on slightly in terms of the scientific side of evolution and spirituality and bridging all of that. But we're going to focus on this diagram here today. So let's go to the next. Now this, we're going to focus on these three pieces labeled with the number 1. And this is what Mark calls entering the spiritual path. And we enter the spiritual path through any of 3 categories of what he calls these wheels. So one is experiencing questions, another is trials and tests, difficulties and challenges, and the third is what he calls emotions and ego. And we're going to talk about each of those and the rest of this diagram in detail. So let's go to the next line, where we're going to talk about experiences and questions. This is what I refer to as the path of seeking, where you're just curious. I, for one, have been eternally curious since I was a kid. I'm that annoying child who goes, why? And the parents just go after a while, because they don't want to describe it anymore. But Mark has another diagram to elucidate on this, where this has the stages of questioning, reflecting, integrating what we've thought about, starting over, having events. And this cycle just continues. You know, whatever happens, you get on the path somewhere. Maybe something happens that makes you wonder, like our friends who've had a near-death experience. And you start to say, okay, what was that about? What's going on? This doesn't conform to my view of the world. You reflect on it, you integrate it, and you follow the cycle. Did you want to add anything to that, Mark?
No, I was just going to say that these, I call them spiritual on-ramps, these training wheels. We'll talk about them later on, but normally when you get interested in a spiritual walk, it could be a midlife crisis. You may feel like there's no purpose in your life or no meaning in your life. You may have had a death of someone you loved or a serious illness that you just, came through. But it's things that make you think about, your life and how you've been living it and how you may want to change it. And that's what this part of the process is. This first step is just a recognition that there's something greater than your life, or that you need help in doing what you're doing in your life. Right. And you're looking for something else, as Daniel was calling seeking. And that's what those little red arrows are, is it's on-ramps into this spiritual development process.
And so the second one of these wheels is particularly interesting. A lot of people come to me from this direction, what I call difficulties, things of illness, death, accidents. When somebody near to them dies, perhaps the first person they really care about has passed away, they're shocked. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on? Or they or someone they know has a severe illness, or an unusual mystery illness sometimes, or an accident. All of these things in the trial and test category tend to lead people to awaken and say, wait a minute, there's more going on here. I've been living in my quiet little cocoon, and I should investigate that. So again, we have some sort of trial, often followed by some suffering, and then reflection and integration. And as I've often taught, I believe challenges are guaranteed in this world. The suffering, in my opinion, from my philosophy, is optional. If we understand the spiritual perspective appropriately, the suffering aspect is not something we have to go through. We can certainly go through questioning and unhappiness and sadness and so forth, but I distinguish that from suffering. The next wheel is the wheel of emotions and ego challenges, as Mark calls it here, and what I refer to as relationships. So Mark, want to talk to us a little bit about how this plays into a spiritual wake-up call?
Sure. And you'll see a smiling spirit up at the very top. I explain spirits as temptations, and you're constantly tempted in life, either to do something selfish, or, you can think of all kinds of different things. But when you have a selfish desire or something that's contrary to what the group may find as the greatest benefit, you may do things that are out of line emotionally, or out of line in terms of your ego, in terms of seeking power, influence, or money. But what you do is you tick people off and you create opposites. People, start to resist you, but at some point they really start to oppose you. And it's at that point where you get this stiff opposition to the things that you've been doing that brings you to a crisis, and sometimes a fall, either economically or socially. And that causes you to reflect, and you make a commitment to change. The important thing about this wheel, and we'll briefly touch on it later on, is that, as Daniel said, it has to do with relationships. And it's not only the person who is making the change that is on this wheel, but it's the people that they affect as well. Because as this person makes a commitment to change their life, it's up to the other people that they've hurt to forgive them and restore them. Because that's the way they can get back on the spiritual path and off this wheel, as if they've been restored to where they were. Doesn't say that you forgive them for what they've done. They can't escape the consequences for that a lot of times, but you can forgive them for the action because they've changed. But this leads people to a spiritual awakening many times. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, especially around the golden mean, and we'll get to that at a certain point.
Mm-hmm. So this ties in some ways to the tests and trials category, because sometimes the relationship is difficult and causes us to experience certain emotions, which causes us to finally wake up and say, all right, enough. obviously we're talking about the challenging relationship issues more than the positive ones. It's often been said, I'm sure all of us have thought at times about how if our lives were flawless and never had any challenges, we would never sit back and say, you know, why am I here? What's this all about? It's like the concept of the seasons, which I really enjoy. And here we are at the spring equinox, that as the seasons change, we go through different phases in life. And likewise, from the perspective of nature and gardening and plants, without rain, without some clouds, the plants would not be able to survive. We need that cycle. So whether our crisis is an emotional one or another form, we have some difficulty of a fall perhaps, and we reflect on it. We may say, all right, you know what, I don't like that. I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to change myself. And this is an interesting one here, is that opposites get created. The difficulty there, and this isn't a continuous cycle, this may be a specific event, when we really oppose something strongly, we give energy to the opposite. Mark, do you want to mention your Ram Dass anecdote?
Yes. Ram Dass, what was his name? Greg Alpert. He was a Harvard professor, went to India, studied with a guru, and actually brought some of the Eastern traditions back to the West. He was one of the first people to do that. But he wrote a book called Be Here Now. And on one of the pages, I want to say it's page 28 or 29, he talked about the situation that was going on in the 1970s with the Vietnam War. Is you had all these people opposed to the war, and you had the National Guard and the military and the people who were fighting, that there was some opposition. And he said that unless you love the person that you're protesting against more than you care about the issue, what you're going to do is you're going to create opposites. And his classic line was, hippies create police and police create hippies. You know, and if you can't love the people you're protesting against, you're going to create these opposites that create hardness of heart, and it only gets stronger. You never dissipate that. And so it's important many times that when you face a situation or a serious situation, that you don't try to ratchet up what's going on, because it gives people a reason to be who they are, to be what they are, to have the emotions that they have. But if you are more complacent and calm when you're dealing with this thing, then it makes people focus on what their actions are and what they're doing. And sometimes it's not in line with how they may be feeling. And that makes them think as well.
And this is, I believe, a fundamental spiritual principle, that what we resist persists. We give it energy by our resistance. And I add to that the idea that what we allow transforms. The idea being that as we allow it, it becomes included in our vibration, as opposed to us trying to exclude it. And this is an inclusive universe. John has his hand up. John, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Mark, thank you so much for this session today. Really appreciate it. I was just wondering if you could repeat the sentence from earlier that you said, which was, if you don't love the people that you're protesting against, you was talking about more opposition. And could you repeat that for me? I just want to make sure I captured it right and that I'm absorbing the principle.
Sure. It's from Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now, on pages 28 and 29. And it was interesting. He actually had a paper doll that he drew, on the page. And he had closed cutouts for a policeman and closed cutouts for a hippie. And he said, hippies create police and police create hippies. And if you can't love the person you're protesting against more than what you're protesting, you're going to create opposites. Same with relationships. You know, if you have a spouse, a significant other, and you're arguing with them, you know, make sure that your relationship is more important than what you're arguing about. It's more important to preserve the relationship than it is to be right. So that's another way to look at it as well. But the hardness of heart thing, people don't go into.
Yeah. This brings the ego into it. And it's often been said, there's a wonderful quote, you can be right or you can be happy. And that phrase speaks to the ego, because the ego wants to be right. It loves to be right. It will do anything to be right. But that is counter to our happiness. And if we can find a way to love, to oppose something, to not agree with something, and yet to understand it, to put it in a place of love in some way, whether it's an issue or an organization or a person, that transforms truly. As I said, what you resist persists, and what you allow, or love is another word for allowing, in my opinion, what you allow transforms. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I've done a lot of work in this area in my personal life, and the what you resist persists, Daniel, it really goes back to the law of attraction to a large degree.
Yeah.
But these couple of insights here that were just brought out are very helpful. So thank you very much.
You're welcome very much. So moving right along then, Mark, what do you have to say about this item number 2?
Okay. Once you get onto the spiritual path, this arrow in the middle is the path that I outlined in the framework. You go through a period where you recognize that there's something greater than you. And that's this first step. And in the book, I called it Recognition of God, but because I was pulling it from another book. And it's actually, I got permission to quote it, but it's called The Critical Journey, Stages in the Life of Faith. And it was written by Janet Hagberg, Hagberg, and Robert Guelich, Guelich. And they devote a chapter to each one of these steps or stages along the spiritual path. It's a book that's given to graduate students in seminaries to study for spiritual development. But I resonated with this when I was going through a spiritual journey, or a part of this spiritual journey that I'll get into in 2008 and 2009, when I was questioning what I believed. And that's what made me resonate with this in particular. But this is a 6-step process that I think it'll form the baseline for a framework that you'll use throughout your life. But the first step is just recognizing that there's something greater than what you know and what you believe, and you want to start seeking that.
Now let me point out at this point, before we get there, that you can substitute. You do not have to accept the word God here. Okay.
And I agree.
It's important that I make the distinction between what I call spirituality and what most people see as religion and religious. They're different. Religion and religious beliefs include rules and musts and shoulds, and spirituality is more about navigating than prescribing and giving rules that you need to follow. Real spirituality, and the reason for that quote from Einstein early on, to me, is this understanding that we are not purely physical beings. And whether you call it God, or whether you call it source, or whether you call it the creator, or whether you call it all that is, whatever you imagine, the greater whole that we all belong to. It's often been said that, we're each drops in the ocean. Whatever you consider that ocean to be, and Mark's subtitle to his book includes the word quantum. And one of the great things we learn from quantum mechanics is that everything is connected through entanglement.
Mhm.
Mark?
Yeah. If we could go on to the next slide, if that's okay.
Yes, definitely.
This gray portion of the arrow is embodied in this step number 2. It's developing an intellectual understanding of your faith or your awareness, your spirituality. You want to adopt an existing path to develop what they would say is, well, and I'm going back to scripture and stuff. Scripture, doing rituals, doing service, all these things. You want to get an intellectual understanding of your faith, because it's going to become important later on. And this could be secular humanism, it could be atheism, it could be, any kind of faith tradition. You want to get an intellectual understanding of the spiritual awareness or spiritual development that you're going through. And that's this gray part of the arrow, but this is called the Life of Discipleship. And again, I took these titles directly from the book. That's why they are what they are.
Yeah.
But it's diving deep into this intellectual understanding of spirituality or a faith tradition. And that leads you into a productive life, which is where you apply what you've understood and what you've learned intellectually. And that could take you, you could cycle back and forth between this discipleship and productive life for a number of years. But what you get to, and this leads you into the third portion of the development framework, is this journey inward, is you'll reach a point to where what you understand intellectually doesn't jive with your life experiences. And that'll create questions. You'll start to question what you've learned. You'll start to question your faith. But they call this in the book, The Critical Journey, the journey inward, because you're trying to reconcile what you've understood intellectually with your life experiences and with your spiritual practice. If you've had spiritual experiences, or if you've developed meditation techniques and things that don't resonate with what you've learned intellectually, you start having questions about that.
So Mark,
where that culminates is.
Let me take us back ahead. Before we're getting ahead of ourselves, or ahead of where I want to go. So I want to go back to this first step. So recognition of God, or that sense that you're part of something greater than the self, as I mentioned, all that is, whatever term you want to use. And the idea then of the life of discipleship, that to me is this category of some measure of commitment. So these make me think of the 12-step programs, like Alcoholics Anonymous, which says it specifically doesn't use the word God. It says a power greater than ourselves, something to that effect. And life of discipleship to me means a commitment to some practice. Is that a reasonable interpretation, Mark?
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. So you join with some practice, whether maybe it's yoga and you do yoga for a while, or maybe it's going to a particular congregation, or coming to a group like this. Thank you very much. And these lead to a more productive, happier life, generally speaking. And you may go to other forms of study, practice, etc. I don't think that ever ends, personally. And this continues to lead to a more productive life. So then tell us, Mark, about the journey inward. Can you say a little more about that?
Yes, this is the important part of the process. And I want you all to be thinking where you may be in your own spiritual journey as it would relate to these different stages on the spiritual development framework. But this is the part where you really try to reconcile what you've been taught and what you understand with your life experiences. And I want to say that everyone's spirituality is unique. because it embodies your life experiences, which are unique to you. So you can't get a cookie cutter spirituality if you really want to develop a strong spiritual understanding. It's got to be related to your life experiences. But you go into this journey inward, you start to question. You may lose your faith. You may toss out certain components of it. But what you end up doing is you reach a point called the wall, and that's where this number 3 is, where you make a decision as to what you believe and what you're going to toss out. And that's where you reconcile everything, and you resolve your past hurts. If you've been hurt by things that people, in a congregation or an organization may have said to you or done to you, you resolve all that. But what you want to do, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. Let me speak to that a little bit. So I like what you said in the title here that we put together, reconciling faith and life experiences. So you're coming to this new spiritual perspective, and then you say, well, what about this terrible thing that happened to me? What about this difficult part of my life, whether it was maybe a relationship with somebody? Most of them are relationships. One of the examples that I think you mentioned, Mark, was if somebody perhaps had a difficult experience with a clergy member, all the terrible things we hear about what happens, say, in the Catholic Church, and I'm sure it's not limited to the Catholic Church. These things, you want to have faith, but then you're like, okay, why does God let bad things happen to good people? Want to talk to that, Mark?
Well, it goes back to spiritual evolution, is that if we're eternal beings, your lifetime here on earth is really an experience. So the good things that happen to you, the bad things that happen to you, they all become experiences that you take back with you and incorporate into your eternal self.
Right.
So everything is an experience from a eternal spiritual evolution standpoint.
So as we take that perspective, where we understand, okay, we change from that perspective of you live once and then you're gone, life sucks and then you die, as some say, and you begin to look at things at a broader perspective, and you begin to see the spiritual side of life, and you begin to consider this concept of a greater, being a part of something greater, and you begin to study and commit yourself to different things for a period. We gain a greater understanding, as with your example, that, okay, this is part of an experience. And in my studies of very widely in many different areas, one that coincides, all of them coincide in general with this, but one that I think of right now is Emanuel Swedenborg, where he describes the fact that he learned that the universe only allows things to happen if they have some positive outcome at some point. He calls this divine providence, the fact that even difficult experiences lead to good things. And how many times, I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, well, I had this terrible experience, but I'm really glad it happened. Because after the fact and after a while, when they've got a chance to process it, they realize that they've grown tremendously from the event. Mark?
Yeah, and going back to the wall in this diagram in item number 3, this is the point where you really strengthen your spirituality. If you can think about your beliefs right now, if you really feel like you have a strong spiritual understanding or a strong faith or a strong belief, when you integrate your life experiences with what you've intellectually understood, that creates a real strong spirituality. And that's what you end up with on this journey outward as we start getting into step number 4. But this is the critical part of the spiritual development framework. And it's okay to question. It's okay to lose your faith. It's okay to change what you believe. It's okay to move from being an atheist to being a conservative or a liberal, or vice versa. As long as you're on a journey, as long as you're on that journey, that's what's important. And it'll take your entire life to do it. But some people end up in these training wheels their whole life, and they don't get on this spiritual path. And so one of the things that this framework highlights is, get on a spiritual path and start thinking about humility, selfless love for others, perseverance, and being able to support people, learning how to love people that are different from you. That's where you're heading. And as we move past this on this journey outward, you move into this life of love. That's the end of this first chart. But what I've done, or what you've been given, is you've been given a baseline. You've been given a starting point for your spiritual development. And this is not the be all and end all chart. It continues on. You've just created a baseline, which in a way it insulates you from all the different things that you see and hear on TV or that people talk to you about, because what you've done is you've become more aware of who you are and what you believe. And that's one of the strengths of this development framework, is you've integrated your life experiences with an intellectual understanding. That gives you strength to stand up to people who will approach you with different ideas and different concepts. That you want to have that baseline before you go on and expand it and change it and modify it. And that's what we'll talk about here in a few minutes.
Yeah. So let me speak to this. I love the brick wall here because it's very true that, we get to a certain point and then it's kind of like, oh, bang, you're banging your head against a brick wall. For me, it wasn't quite as dramatic or painful as that may sound, but it was somewhat similar in that I kept in this stage of, and with all of these, I think we go through this process and it's not the end. We go back in a sense, and we come back through different pieces of this in different ways at different times and different lifetimes, if you believe in different lifetimes. But for me, the thing that was holding me up after a lifetime of inquiry and study was I kept trying to figure out what was the right answer. And so any truth I had to compare to all the other truths, and then it either won or I would toss it because some other truth was greater than it. And this was for me the big breakthrough. That was the big wall, was this idea that there was only one truth and everything had to be tested against it. And I do believe there are some great truths which are universally true and stand the test of time. But many of the truths are momentary or true for us at the stage that we're in presently in our lives. And when we realize that, we can say, okay. And the big revelation for me was the idea that when we do that, when we test A against B and see which one's going to win, we're creating an exclusionary view of the world. We're saying, well, okay, this I'm going to include and this I'm going to exclude. We don't need to go there. What we can do is say, okay, all of this exists. This exists as well as this, and I prefer this, so I'm going to focus on this. But we don't have to exclude this over here. For me, that is summed up by the concept of all of life experience, physical or spiritual, being a buffet of experiences that we can experience. And if you don't like this particular item on the buffet, you don't have to take it, leave it behind. But it doesn't mean you have to get it removed from the buffet of life. Mark?
Yeah. Well, let's move on to step number 4, if you don't mind.
I do not mind.
And this is where you've you've not pushed aside, but you don't rely on this intellectual understanding so much anymore, because with that integration of your intellectual understanding with your life experiences, you've developed that spirituality on your own, and that allows you to move on beyond this basic faith. And I think that's what makes you stronger. I know a lot of people who, just with an intellectual understanding of something, they're easy to challenge. It's hard for them to support things that they don't have an experiential understanding of. Now, if you've had a near-death experience, or if you've had a spiritual experience, that's been probably a great underpinning for you and what you believe, and that's given you a strength of understanding. But it's this integration that helps you, and it leads you into this life of love. And I think what you'll find throughout your life is that one of the key components is loving the people around you. Treat the people around you well, build community, build family, build friends, and because you're helping not only yourself, but you're helping all these other people as well. And that's really what life is all about, is loving other people and working together to do things that are greater than what you could accomplish individually. But we'll come back to this circle with the faith, hope, and love here a little bit later on. But I wanted to talk about some of the other processes that are going on in the spiritual development framework. We talked about the numbers 1 through 4. Those are the steps in the framework, but we have 4 processes that have the letters A through D, and we'll cover those real quick. While you're going through the spiritual development process, there's a spiritual awareness development. And you can call it different things. This is just what I chose to call it. But it's basically quieting your mind and purifying your heart. Those are 2 very important things, because a lot of people want to have spiritual experiences. If you haven't already had them, people want to have them, but the best way to do it is to let it happen naturally. And the way you do it is through meditation and other practices. Learn to quiet your mind, get rid of all that chatter going on in your mind, and sit back in a recliner or on a couch and just allow yourself to be without thinking. But develop this quiet mind that will allow you to hear these spiritual voices or sense these spiritual intuitions. And then also work to, and I say purify your heart, but you can also say raise your vibrations, because it's when you get into these higher levels that you start getting more and more spiritual communications. You can do this by the way you think, the things you read. You can, I know people talk about eating vegetarian. There's a lot of energy in vegetables. But those things to create this spiritual, make it easier for the spiritual side to come into you and manifest itself within you. Daniel, did you want to say anything on that?
Well, this is the key turning point. Otherwise you're in this process of having experiences and questions, and a lot of people just go around on that wheel and never really get off it, or they have difficulties, challenges, and trials in their lives, and they just see that as I said, life sucks and then you die, and they never try to go much further, or they get stuck in emotional and ego-based issues. But as you call these, I love that you call these the spiritual on-ramps. That's your little red arrows here, that they are leading you to this center path here, where you begin to recognize that there is a spiritual element, that there's more going on. Is the best way of describing spirituality. It's more than meets the eye. And many descriptions have been used by many people of the example of a vision, where we see just a tiny spectrum of the vibrational universe. And we interpret that through our eyes as color and light and vision. And then there is another piece of that same spectrum of vibration, which we interpret as sound. But this is a continuous spectrum with many, many other aspects to it. And I like to think how our lives are becoming more spiritual day by day, just by nature of the physical world. And we're realizing, back in the 1800s when Marconi and Tesla, Marconi and Tesla figured out that there was something called radio waves. What are these things? We had never heard of them before. We had never experienced them before. And now today, they're ubiquitous, and they power things like our cell phones and our Wi-Fi and all of those things. So we are, in a sense, becoming more spiritual day by day, just by the nature of our understanding of the non-physical and our ability to employ it. And I think we'll speak to that a little more. But hopefully all of that brings you to some recognition of the invisible, let's call it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's a good segue into the next slide, is recognizing, and I call them evil spirits, but it's not. It's just recognizing there's a spiritual aspect to what you think as well. And realize that a lot of these things are, a lot of the thoughts you have are not necessarily your own thoughts, and that they could be inserted there as part of your training, as part of your spiritual development. But it's temptation. Recognize temptation for what it is and push it away.
So before you go, I want to, I asked Mark a question yesterday as we were preparing for this, and he had a wonderful answer. The question of, quote, evil. What is evil? It's a very highly charged word, and often it's used to say that, something is completely unacceptable. And Mark had a wonderful definition that he gave me. Do you care to share that? Do you remember what you said?
It's selfishness.
Selfishness.
Yeah.
That is the perfect definition. When you put yourself before others, and I don't mean at all times, I don't mean you sacrifice yourself to the bone for others, but when you take care of yourself in order to be able to serve others, that is a positive form of selfishness. But if you worry only about yourself and you believe each of us has to worry about ourselves and we're not connected and we're not responsible for each other, that form of selfishness, I think, is the form that is the dangerous one. And the near-death experiencers and many other spiritual teachers point to that a lot. Mark? Yeah.
One other thing, too, is just be cognizant of what you're thinking. And a warning sign or a red flag or a danger point is when you start dwelling on stuff. Many times the thoughts you have are not your own, but when you start dwelling on stuff, or like getting angry or seeking revenge, or, just, oh, I can't.
Oh, did we lose Mark? Did we lose me?
And dwelling on these different things. So recognize that as a warning flag, but look at it all as part of your training, as well as you're being tempted. But when you succumb to those temptations, one of the other aspects of the spirits that are helping you with all this is they bring you to a crisis point faster, so that you have more time in your life to come out of it. And that's why I say that these are smiling spirits, is that these temptations are designed to teach you, bring you to a crisis point quickly, so that you have more time to recover and get back on a spiritual path and continue along your journey. So that's one way to look at this. Daniel, you want to add anything on that?
No, I think that's wonderful.
But they are real. Let me say that they are very real, and your thoughts are not necessarily your own, and you need to be cognizant of that.
That is something that I teach as well, Mark. That also something that Swedenborg went into, that he saw that we were able to be influenced. There were outside influences on our thoughts, and when we realize that, we can stop identifying so thoroughly with our thoughts and realize, all right, you know what? This thought I don't like, I'm going to let it go. And this thought I do like. And so I'm going to emphasize that. And that's where I say, count your blessings, find things to be appreciative of. Look at the glass as half full. It's just a glass and it's got whatever it's got in it. But if you concentrate on the beneficial part, on the part that you appreciate, instead of the part that may be lacking for you that you would like to have there, it changes your entire perspective. And once you get comfortable with that, once you do that more and more frequently, it becomes your new pattern. Instead of the traditional pattern that most people in this world experience, the negative patterns of, oh, woe is me, and oh, doesn't it figure that, you know, this would happen to me, it's just my luck, all those sorts of negative patterns that we get into. Let those go. Instead, find positive things. One of my favorite sayings, it's all good. Another one being, everything is always working out for me. There are many positive phrases you can use instead of those negative ones that create whole new wheels, if you will, whole new patterns in your life. Mark?
Yeah, and we had a question down in the chat.
Oh.
Too, from Diane. She said, are you saying all temptations are negative? And it's not necessarily the case. And I would even say all temptations are positive in a way, is that you're being tested. You're being tested in your dreams. And I can add that too. You're being tested with your thoughts. You're being tested in your dreams, because when you get tested in your physical life, a lot of times there's things that can't be undone. So you may have dreams at night where you're given a certain situation and you're left to say, how would I choose to respond? You're given a temptation and you choose in your mind whether to respond to that or not. That's part of your spiritual development that you're going through. So things that may seem bad, thoughts that may seem bad, dreams that may disturb you or whatever, it could be part of your spiritual training. And a lot of this too is to help you get over fear, because as we'll get into the later steps in the process, one of the big things that holds us back in our development is fear, especially when we start getting into the spiritual side of things.
Well, this was the perfect segue to the next slide, where we touch on all of this wheels. And what do we call this? I've often referred to this world as a spiritual gymnasium. And so those temptations are like weights that we're lifting. They're like, oh, yeah, let me do that. And then you realize after you've done it, oh, that didn't work out the way I wanted it to, or I don't like the way I feel, or I didn't realize that was going to hurt this person. So those things are leading us along the path and helping us develop. Mark?
Yeah, no, we've talked quite a bit about these training wheels, and I don't really have that much more to add, but just that they're part of your spiritual development as well. You have that path in the middle, but there's things that you can learn in each one of the different areas with experiences and questions, trials and tests, and learning to tame your ego and your emotions. And I mentioned earlier the golden mean, and this is something you can look up on Google, but it's walking the middle road. And they say stay away from the left or the right. You may have heard that, or the sides of the road. That's too little of something or too much of something. And I can use it, some examples by saying, looking at courage, being courageous. Too little courage is someone who's always conforming, who's not challenging. And someone who has too much courage could be seen as being reckless. Mm-hmm. The same thing with money. If you're in the middle of the road, you may be seen as being generous, but if you have too little of it, you may be seen as being a miser, or if you have too much of it, you may be seen as being a spendthrift. So it's riding the middle of the road, and I think that's what this ego and emotions training wheel helps you do. Is it helps you develop that middle of the road walk in your life and that part.
Buddhism.
So that was one thing I wanted to get to since I mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, Buddhism speaks to this and refers to it as the middle way, that not overindulging and not underindulging, not depriving yourself of everything in the world and not trying to acquire everything in the world, but finding that happy medium. That's a really important point on this path. So
cool. And the last process is community development. Don't walk this path by yourself, especially, with things that you keep in your head and not share with people. There was a guy that told me a long time ago, it still resonates with me. He said, the worst part of town is in your head, because that's where you can get mugged. All these thoughts you have that you keep to yourself, that you think, I'm not this, I shouldn't have done that, or, oh, I can't believe. Don't keep it to yourself. Build community, build your family, your friends, your coworkers, your community, your neighbors. Build community and rely on people, and build a group that works together. And this is a safety net along the spiritual path, but you're also helping other people on that path as well. There's people with different needs and different wants and desires, and you may or may not be aware of them. But by you loving them and helping them along on their way, you're helping them in their spiritual development as well. And then as you get to know people and build relationships, as Daniel was mentioning earlier, people can be more open with confronting you about things before they become serious. So you can make changes in your life before you really experience some pain and suffering on some of these training wheels, because someone felt comfortable enough to approach you about it and talk to you about it before it became something that was significant. But community development is very important as part of this spiritual process.
So this reminds me again of the 12-step programs. The idea there being that not only do you need to understand, have some understanding of a power greater than yourself, but the core of AA and the 12-step program is having a group, having a support structure. And that is something that, again, if we think, well, it's a dog-eat-dog world, I need to get mine, you need to worry about yours, that is not the path. Mark?
Yeah, no, I'm looking at Jerry's picture of a dog up there, and it was reminding me of, and as you were saying, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and I'm wearing milk-bone underwear. So it's important to have a community. Those guys can help you, and people working together as a group can accomplish so much more than people working individually. So your community helps keep you on a path when you despair or feel so bad you want to drop off. They help keep you on the path as well. So that's another one of the safety net features of having a community.
We'll get you some new underwear, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Jerry, for that photo. I like it.
You guys are welcome. That's hilarious. Thank you.
So moving to the next one here.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time on the spiritual development framework, but what it really is, it's a technique. Develop an intellectual understanding of something, compare it with your life experiences, reconcile it, internalize it, and move on. And that can be summarized in one of these three juxtapositions. You have a juxtaposition of faith, and that's what we just went through, is developing this intellectual understanding, reconciling, and internalizing. That's the first step to give you a baseline of a spiritual maturity, spiritual development. But you're going to move on from that to expand it to include this love for others and learning how to love people who are not like you, people of different cultures, different languages, different backgrounds, people who may annoy you, but you've got to learn how to love them. You've got to learn how to work together with them. And that's going to take you most of your life. But use this technique as a way to get into that, understand them from an intellectual standpoint, not saying that everybody's an intellectual, study or whatever, but understand them from one point, and then learn how they add to your life and how they can increase, the beauty and the joy of your life, and the same thing with you in their life as well. But that brings us to this juxtapositions of hope, is to where you learn how to support those people. And then as they face persecution for who they are, or people, start approaching them about things, aspects of their life, you may find yourself wanting to defend them. And that helps you develop perseverance in what you believe in, who you are, is learning how to love these other people and learning how to support them and defend them. Develop perseverance, and then in the end, you're going to develop moral courage as a result of your sensitivity that you've developed around the lives of other people. And that's where you're moving into more of the advanced stages of spiritual development. But this, I call them juxtapositions, but it's the broader path that you're taking after you've learned this technique.
Interesting. Do you want to say a little more about moral courage?
Moral courage comes, it's an advanced part of the process, but it's after you've learned how to selflessly love these other people and understand people who are not like you. You develop this sensitivity toward them and to what they're going through. Say like someone who's homeless on the street, you see them. If you don't have this sensitivity toward them, you'll tend to avoid them. And that's a form of cowardice, is not allowing yourself to be sensitive to the plights of others. But if you develop this sensitivity, that helps you develop this moral courage to stand up for those people who can't stand up for themselves, and to help you be there and to take a stand and to suffer along with them if someone's going to persecute you as well as them. But that's part of this, that's an advanced form of your spiritual development. It's knowing who you are and what you believe, and then knowing other people and having this sensitivity toward them. And that's developing the perseverance and the moral courage to be able to stand up with them and for them.
Beautiful. We have a couple more slides, and then I want to open it to open questions for folks. So really, it hinges on becoming more spiritually self-aware, which enables us, if I understand you, to grow more robustly, more thoroughly, more deeply. Whereas if we're purely in the physical and we think we're just, if we're an atheist, not anything against atheists, but if we don't believe we're connected, if we don't believe that there's more going on, I think our progress is stunted. It's like a tree with poor roots, or doesn't get enough nutrients or water. Whereas if we're spiritually self-aware, we grow deeper roots, we have more nutrients available to us, we are better watered. Comments?
And if you think about humans as opposed to animals, humans are physically self-aware. And you may have seen some internet videos where people put a mirror up in the jungle, and you'd have different animals walk in front of it and beat their chests or growl or howl or whatever in front of the mirror, because they didn't recognize that as an image of themselves. We are physically self-aware. We recognize our image when we look at ourselves in a mirror. But one of the goals of spiritual development is to become spiritually self-aware, is to recognize that you're a spiritual being and not a physical being. And that's a worldview change that comes at the very end of this spiritual development process. Is once you become aware of yourself as a spiritual being, you're able to take steps of love for other people that you wouldn't take when you were thinking of yourself as a physical being, because you would want to protect yourself. But as a spiritual being, and say, I'm an eternal being, I know that I'm going to live, you'll do things for other people that you might not do without that worldview change. And that's the ultimate goal of this spiritual development process, is a worldview change that allows you to do more than you would otherwise.
I love that. I love that. So spiritually speaking, when we're not self-aware, we're like that gorilla seeing the reflection in the mirror and thinking it's another gorilla that's going to challenge us. So that brings us back to this final point here, where we live a life of love, with love, hope, and faith working together.
And that's embodied in this worldview change. That's what that last little circle is all embodying. And the letter Z in my book, when I write about this, I talk about climbing the Z axis. The Z axis. If you think of X, Y, and Z as a three-dimensional graph, X and Y is where we're living our lives. But if you can climb up above that, and you may have heard it called a third-party witness what's going on and seeing how the actions of some people affect the lives of others, and how what you do and say affects the lives of other people. But when you can look at it as an independent third party, that's another way of helping you change your worldview. But that's where you get at it at this point after you've gone through all these other processes. And let me say that you probably won't be able to accomplish all this in this lifetime, but you will be able to go along the path. And if you know where you want to go, you'll be able to go along it and be able to move forward. And that's one of the goals of having this spiritual development framework, is to give you a roadmap or a pathway to follow in your life, because a lot of people may not have seen this or may not be aware of it. And you would go from seminar to conference to workshop to all these different things, and you're doing in this Richard Dawkins example, you're doing this probabilistic, change, where if you had an evolutionary function with an objective, you'd be able to move faster and progress a lot quicker.
So Mark, I love the Z-axis analogy, because, it's like we are two-dimensional beings living on this flat plane. And as we become a multi-dimensional, a three-dimensional or more dimensional being, we gain a different perspective. I was just listening to an anecdote by a monk recently, where he said, 4 people were traveling down a road, and 5 people, were traveling down a road, and they were lost. And one said, my intuition says it's definitely over here on the left, and I'm going to go this way. And he goes off on the left. And another one says, no, I'm sure the way back is to the right. And another says, oh no, I'm positive it's forward. And the fourth one says, I'm going to go back the way we came. And the fifth one says, I'm going to climb this tree. And from that higher perspective, I will be able to see what is the better path to get me back to the point that I want to get back to. So very apropos. It's amazing how those synchronicities keep lining up in our lives when we're on this path. To finish this part of the interview, Mark, do you want to take us through this particular piece from your book?
Yeah, and these next 2 pages just do a little, or show you a little verse. It's in my book. It's something I wrote back in 2016, but it summarizes what we've talked about today, and all the different processes, all the different steps, all the different ways to build community. But it's basically saying, quiet your mind, pray, build relationships, and build your love for other people. And then when you get around other people, satisfy their basic needs for food, shelter, and clothes, and then inspire them, give them hopes and dreams for their own life, and help them grow in their own spiritual development.
Did you want to say anything about this?
Yeah, and it's just continuing on, is learn how to struggle together as a group and as a community, share your joys and your burdens, but understand that life's difficulties are spiritual tests that build your faith. And as you persevere and you go through that and build that selfless love for others, that's what develops your spiritual strength.
Yeah, that's just marvelous. I can't say enough good things. So before we get to the Q&A portion, this is the cover of Mark's book. It's called Christianity from a Spiritual Perspective. Real Spirituality in a Quantum World, version 3, his third edition. Mark, like myself, likes to refine things. And I can tell you that the material we've been going over here is in section 3 of Mark's book, if I'm
Right.
not mistaken.
Yeah.
And as you can sort of tell from all of this, Mark is a really interesting person, has a wonderful perspective, really not dogmatic, not believing that you have to be a Christian or of any particular faith, just that the spiritual path in general is the important thing. Is that fair, Mark?
Right. And as Daniel and I were talking yesterday, I've changed this title, once already, from Christianity from a different perspective to Christianity from a spiritual perspective. But in the next edition of the book, I'm going to say spirituality from a different perspective. So the whole book, it has nothing to do with Christianity, although, Christianity is my faith tradition I came up with. That's why I put it in there. But the idea that I wanted to convey in the book is to justify the existence of world religions using science, and do it from a science orientation and not from doctrine or dogma, because you have all the skeptics out there saying, show me proof, show me evidence. Well, that's what I wanted to do, was to show them proof and show them evidence for why world religions exist. And my answer for that goes back to spiritual evolution, which is what we talked about at the start of this session.
Wonderful. Marvelous. Well, do we have questions? Anybody here want to chime in with something? Okay, here's one in the chat. Can you comment on life plans versus a random walk through life?
Oh, wow. It depends on who you are. Both are good. There was a book that I read back in the 1980s called A Random Walk Down Wall Street. And they were talking about people who were deliberate about looking at different stocks to invest in versus just putting a bunch of stocks on the wall and throwing darts at it and investing in those. And they said the people who did the random walk did just as well as the people who did the planning. So both can be equally good. I'm thinking of another thing too. When I was in college, I was in a 4-year leadership development program. And one of the things we did was we did a week at a leadership development institute in Greensboro called the Center for Creative Leadership. And one of the teachers there, he told us to lay out our goals and objectives that we wanted to accomplish during that year. And so we did a list of goals and objectives. And he said, now put it in this envelope and seal it and address it to yourself. And he said, I'm going to send it out to you in a year. And he said 90% of the people who fill these things out, he sends them a letter and says, now tell me, what did you accomplish? And 90% of the people say, nothing. I didn't do any of those goals that I said I was going to do. But he also said in business, people who follow their goals, who develop goals and follow their goals, get farther along than people who don't. Mm-hmm. So you can look at it from both of those perspectives. From a spiritual development standpoint, you can say a random walk is going on those training wheels, and those provide valuable information as well. They teach you how to be in relationship with other people and help you from your own experiences be able to relate to other people and to be able to counsel and mentor other people who are going through something that you've already been through. So there's advantages to that. Just one key thing about the spiritual path is that if you know about it, that helps you move along it. And I think that's what's important there. So I hope I would say it's a balance between the two. Does that help? I think that was from Jim.
Yes, it was. Is that good, Jim?
I guess I was
You're good.
I was referring more to the idea that we come into this incarnation with objectives that we'd like to, that our souls have set for us, as opposed to plans that we develop during this lifetime.
Here's my interpretation of this, Jim. When we come, the way I see it, again, take this if it works for you, but not if it doesn't. When we come into the world, what we're doing is we're choosing a certain time frame. We're choosing parents. We're choosing, I believe we choose all these things. We choose our attributes, our personal attributes, the degree of intellect and talents and so forth. And we give ourselves a certain path. But along that path, there are many side roads we can take. And while those side roads may diverge a little bit or may help us with our general direction, that's all part of the plan. So the path that we've preset when we are planning the life before we come, that is the thing that kind of creates the guardrails to keep us on a certain path, the talents and everything else. So if I don't have musical talent, there's no danger that I'm going to go off and become a rock star, you know? So that's not really an option. You follow me? Jim?
Yeah, I guess I kind of agree with that. There are certain paths that might get presented to us through our life, and we can choose whether we want to go down that path or not. But I do think that there is something, I wouldn't say it's predestined, but these paths are planned ahead of time. These are the options that are going to be presented to you. People cross our paths sometimes for a purpose.
Right.
And,
but then we have free will.
I think that there is something to the notion.
Yeah. And let me add something to that as well. There's a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He was a Jewish psychiatrist who was in Auschwitz during World War II. Mm. And he had a quote. It's a very famous quote, actually, attributed to him. And the expanded version of it was, he said, one day he was looking out over the compound in Auschwitz, and he said there were few in number, but there were men going around giving away their last scraps of bread to people and encouraging others. And he said, it was at that point that I realized you can take everything away from a person, and it could be their celebrity, their power, their influence, their money, everything. But you can't take away the way they choose to respond to any given situation. And that's what I think is the real key to spiritual development, is at some point in your life, especially later on in your life, things start getting taken away. And you're being more and more challenged with how you respond. But it's how you choose to respond in those situations, especially as they get more and more difficult, that define the depth of the maturity of your spirituality. And we see that during our lifetime, but I think we also see that at the end of our lifetime as well.
Amen. Is there anyone else who would like to chime in? Any questions? Anything from the audience?
I have a question, Daniel. Hi, it's Jerry.
Hi, Jerry.
Hey, Jerry.
One thing that I struggle with lately is, as I develop my spirituality and my spiritual path, is how to handle it or not to demonstrate a desire to go down a similar personal development spiritual path. And it becomes sort of a painful distancing of our paths. And I just would be curious to hear your perspective on how to handle that type of an experience.
You broke up a little bit. Could you reiterate briefly?
Sure. Yeah. So like when I'm on my spiritual path and some of my close relations and friends and family are not, or at least I perceive them as not, how to handle that experience, because it's somewhat painful to feel the distance in that experience.
So the answer to me, is this group that we're in right here and other groups like it, is finding communities of people who share my perspective, and allowing those other people to have their perspective. Because if you try to go down the path of convincing them that your path is the right path, that's the wrong path. There's a lot of paths.
Right. Yeah.
Allowing them, remember, allowing is love, allowing them to be themselves and you be yourself, and find that through other channels. Thank goodness we have the internet. Back in the day, in the 80s, I was looking for books. I'd hang out in bookstores and grab books. And I used to think, I can't wait until technology evolves to the point where we can connect with people who have similar interests. And even back then, there were some communities and you could find them here and there, but now we can specialize and we can find the people who are really on our wavelength. So thank goodness for today.
And Jerry, I'll echo that too. Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. This path that I've been on, my wife doesn't have any interest in.
Yes.
And yet it's very important to me. So what I choose to do is, what are the things that are important to her? Where do we have our commonalities, and focus on that rather than focusing on the differences.
That's
exactly.
Good.
And I tell the same story. My wife doesn't particularly care about philosophy and spirituality and all of this stuff, but she allows me to, and that's perfect. We have enough other things in common that we don't have to have 100% in common. We can have some portions that are not. There's another question here from Paulina. Can you teach spirituality to others, or is it an interpersonal path? I'd say it's both. We are here today, Mark and I, sharing with you all, and that is a form of teaching. But it is also an inner path. So it's both. It's not an either or. Mark, do you want to say anything to that?
As I was looking at that question, I was thinking of this old phrase, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Is that you can teach all these different things, but until you experience it yourself, you won't fully embrace it or understand it. And I think that's the other component. You can be taught certain things, but it's to lead you to that experiential part of spirituality. And that's just as important. And I think that's what shapes you even more is your personal experiences than the intellectual teaching. But you need the teaching first to get an idea of what you need to search for and what you need to look for.
Kathy has a question or a comment. Kathy? Want to unmute yourself if you're muted? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, you're muted. You're muted, Kathy.
There we go.
That better?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I absolutely love being in this conversation today because, like you say, not everybody is in tune that way. The thing I just like to throw out there, and it's not a criticism, it's just an observation, is that maybe I'm a little bit behind y'all on this path, but I hate to think that I became a human just to be a spiritual being. I'm here to really integrate and experience what it's like to be human. So I think in all these graphs and everything and stuff, I saw the word joy once. And lighten up, we're here to have fun with one another and for ourselves and to enjoy all these wonderful things on earth, like dancing and music and all those things too. So I'm just saying, I may take a little longer to get there, but I'm going to have a better time along the way.
No.
Thank you.
Joy and fun is part of it. It's just the nature of the conversation today didn't include a lot of that. Mark, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, and thank you for that. No, I'll incorporate that when I do this next update on my book. But what I wanted to say is if we're eternal beings, and I believe we are, there's things that you can't teach an eternal being when they know that they're eternal. So you have to give them this lifetime where it's temporary and where people die from accidents or war or crime or whatever to teach them how to control their emotions. And then similarly, give them great beauty, great wealth, great celebrity, and tempt them with these emotional things that they have, challenges that they can learn and grow from. But certainly, yeah, have fun. No, I agree with that too. And yeah, I tend to overanalyze things as well. So just and I'll also say, if you want to have fun, watch me dance. Oh my gosh. So that's probably my failing in life, that whatever brain cells went to this intellectual stuff, it came from the part that would learn how to dance.
Funny you should bring that up. Kathy was saying she loves to dance.
Oh yeah. So, and a few years ago, I tried to learn how to tango, and because I had a friend who was a tango dancer. And so I got hooked up with a guy who's probably one of the best tango instructors in Charlotte. And his business card said, anyone can learn how to tango. But I think he was getting ready to scratch that out when he met me. He was sitting there giving me a glass of wine beforehand. He was, his shoulders or his arms on my shoulders, walking back and forth, and I could not keep time. In the end, as a lessons learned, I'll say, if you know someone who just can't get it, buy a metronome and do that click, 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 click. And that'll keep them on. It's like when you're teaching people piano, if they can't keep to a certain rhythm, buy a metronome. That's what I think I needed. But this fella, he was ready to pull his hair out after about 7 or 8 sessions with me, because I could not keep a rhythm.
That's great.
And
that's a tough
I think,
one. That's a tough one, tango.
And Daniel, I think, hit it. Somebody hit it here just a couple weeks ago, is that I was thinking too much. Is you don't want to think when you're doing this. You just want to move and experience. And if that's something I need to do, that's something I need to do.
Right.
Just move and experience.
Guilty. I'm guilty too.
Yeah.
Anybody else we haven't heard from? A couple of folks. I see some. I see Chris. Hello, Chris. Care to chime in?
I'm just taking it in. I'm on a spiritual path, but it's quite, how should I say it? I'm on a dream path. And I'm also on, I don't know if anybody knows anything about Jeffrey Martin's Finders, where he goes through lots of different kinds of meditation techniques where you can come into a location which is vast, open, kind of enlightenment, many different kinds, but I'm more on that end of the spectrum. I used to have a Christian cult I was part of that gave me a very traumatic childhood. So I'm recovering from a cult fiction. So I definitely take a distance from Christianity. I used to be very intellectual and heady, and now it's a very different process that I use. And Mark, I do bow to you, just on a different path. We all have these different paths. So I don't want to put too much into the conversation right now. I'm just listening and taking it in, appreciating everybody's wonderful heartedness here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Chris, I just want to say it, and to honor you too, it's good to be on a path. That's what's important to me. I don't care what path people are on, as long as they're on a path. And as long as you have some cognizant, or you're cognizant of the spiritual nature of things, that's what's important to me. And so I'm thankful that, you're on that path and you're so dedicated to it, because it seems like you're very much into it, and that's great.
I completely agree.
Jim sponsored Dorothy Walters a few days ago, and I recognized Dorothy. I recognized that Kundalini inner love that comes up through the chakra system.
Mm-hmm.
And I started on my real path with Jungian analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got introduced to dream work, that's when my Kundalini process started.
That's cool.
So that's, and it's very body centered. It's not, I lost my mind a long time ago and came to my senses. So that's been my path, and it's been a very deeply embodied spirituality. So growing up, my spirituality was like, it's out there, God's out there. Well, God's not out there. might be out there, but he's definitely in there. So I kept looking for the God within.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I won't keep going here. But
No, but
that's kind of a
great.
nutshell.
That's great, and thanks for that perspective.
And it's a very good point. It's inside. Many spiritual traditions and teachers say this. You need to look inside, and as Mark's diagram showed, you go on the inward journey in order to enable your outward journey.
There's a
Anyone else?
notion that we are all one.
Yeah.
But we have a myriad of ways we go about being one. So I think we all contribute to a bigger picture in different ways. So Kathy's path and Chris's path and Mark's path, we're all evolving maybe toward a similar end point, but how you get there, we learn from one another. I think that's why these conversations are important. Every time I meet somebody that is willing to talk about their spiritual nature, there's something that I can glean from them that I hadn't thought of before. So I feel there's value in us having these conversations.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, I think God prefers diversity. Yeah. We are one, but that doesn't mean we need to be uniform.
Right. And just to add, the tagline for Consciousness Cafe is growth through exploration. So as we're all exploring these different paths, we're all growing.
All right. Anyone else? All right. Well, I'll bring this to a close. Thank you so much, Mark. This has been wonderful. Thank you all for attending. God bless you all. Love you all. Enjoy your path.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, Mark, it's yours.
Yeah, no, that was good. I enjoyed it. We didn't get to your part, though. I know you wanted to get there.
My part? What was my part?
That second half.
What second half?
Okay, all right.
No, that was exactly everything I expected us to do.
Oh, really? Okay, good. Because I saw you had slides down below that, and I was saying, oh no, he wanted to cover some more stuff. And
no, I those were finishing things. So I had your book, I had another of my Soulful Growth, and that was the end. So the other slides is because I start from a template that I've been using for a while, and so it's old slides that I keep around because I'm a retentive type of personality.
Okay, that's good.
No, this
then
is
I feel
perfect.
better. I was thinking I was taken away from your time.
What? So, are you open to a couple suggestions?
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
So
I enjoy them.
I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson once speaking, and he was speaking about how he saw Carl Sagan doing Carl Sagan's thing when he was a young man, when Neil was a young man, and he said, "I want to do that." And he got himself to the point where he was, beginning to do that. And he said, okay, I need to understand how to do interviews. So he studied a lot of interviews. And not all interviewers understand this, and therefore, it doesn't always work out so well. Some interviewers go on too long. Hopefully, I didn't do that so much. I was trying to help provide. Okay. Some go on too long. Am I back? Hello?
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think I missed you. I missed your comment.
So some folks may go on too long on a particular section, and it becomes more about them than about the person being interviewed. I was doing my best to add some extra color to your materials, because if it's all from one perspective, it's sort of too uniform. Whereas if you add some variety, that's good. But the main point that I'm getting at is it's like a tennis match, okay? Or like a
Losing you again.
basketball. Okay. Am I back? Hello, 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 hello. Am I back? Am I back?
Yeah, you are.
I'm gonna stop my video. Well, no, all right, I'll leave it in. It's like a basketball game too. You don't want to hog the ball. So
Right.
you want to try and hand it off and hand it back, and then hand it off and hand it back. And it felt like you were trying to cram a lot of material in to me. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm not
Well,
sure
you
that,
see, I was thinking that you had more slides down below mine. I was trying to get through stuff.
no. But you want it to be in bite-sized chunks, you know? That's, I think, the key thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really went very well. I think we did a great job, meshed nicely. I give this one a total thumbs up. Okay, man?
Yeah, no, I was happy with it. And I was happy with the conversation going back and forth too, because you did offer a different perspective on the stuff.
Right.
So that's great. I was just thinking that you had stuff going on beyond me, and I was trying to get through things, but maybe there was stuff I could have left out. I think it's the old writers thing, is they say you throw out 35 to 50% of your book, you know, in order to get to what you've got. So I need to pare it down even more than what I've done.
Yeah, the writers things, you triggered a thought that I've already lost. But yes, good material, good conversation. Oh, I'm still recording apparently.
Yes, you are.